Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. President, I rise here today to express my deep concern with this Transportation Conference report, and more particular, about a provision that was slipped into the Transportation Conference report literally in the dark of the night earlier this week. This provision that was, which I will describe, could have a devastating effect on my state. Is a region that works together. It's part of a expanded metropolitan area, and a critical part of this is a waterway which allows goods to be transferred up and down all the way to the Delta in the Mississippi and all the way out the St. Lawrence Seaway. It is the Middle West access to commerce that centers around the Chicago, Northwest Indiana area. And this provision that was slipped in without debate, without consideration, that didn't appear in the Senate bill, transportation bill, and didn't appear in the House transportation bill, and therefore is a blatant violation of Rule 28, which simply states you can't do this kind of thing, but it was done anyway. And I will be at the proper point here raising an objection to that in a procedural way. Let me first talk, if I could, about the way in which we do business around here. You know, throughout my campaign in 2010 to return to the Senate, I continually heard from people as to how frustrating they were with the process with which laws are passed. They say, you know, people come home and we say, why did you vote against that? And we say, well, you know, I voted against that because it included this over here, which was not relevant to it, and even though I liked the rest of the bill, I didn't like this part, or vice versa. I voted for this, even though I didn't like what it included, because you know what? They packaged it all together. And therefore, there's nothing on record as to where I stand. They say to us, where you stand. We don't know whether your yes is a yes or your no is a no, because it's so confusing the way you mix the whole thing together. Now, that's exactly what's happening here today. We have taken a transportation bill which was adeptly led by the senator from California and the senator from Oklahoma. They did a marvelous job in putting a transportation package together. And now it's merged with two other major provisions. And so we then get one vote on this, and people come down and say, well, I have a real problem with the student loan bill, or I have a real problem with the flood insurance bill, but I wanted to vote for the transportation bill, and now I'm stuck in the position of having to vote yes on the whole thing, accepting what I have a problem with, or another bill over here, or no, even though I want parts of the other bills to pass. And so then we go home and we explain this to the people that we represent, and they say, why can't you guys and ladies just take up one thing, vote yes or vote no, come home, defend your vote, but we at least know how you stand. Instead of this gobbledygook, throw everything in one big pot and vote your yes or vote your no. So first of all, the way we package bills here, I think, is something, it's no wonder people are skeptical. It's no wonder our approval rating is where it is. This gobbledygook, so-called magic dust that we use around here to obscure what we really stand for and what we really stand against is very frustrating to the American people, and I can't tell you how much that has been expressed to me when I go back home and talk to them and try to explain certain votes and procedures, and they say, just be straight up, be transparent, pick out something, you're either for it or against it. We'll evaluate whether we want to support you or not support you at the next election on the basis of how we think you're voting. But when you cloud over the whole thing, we don't know what's going on. So that's one concern, packaging bills. Secondly, we got a problem here, major problem with our debt. We've known that. We spent the first 6 months of 2011 trying to come up with long-term solutions which would restructure some of our spending and put a lid on some of our spending. And finally, by August of 2011, Congress reached an agreement called the Budget Control Act, which basically put caps on how much we would spend. trying to hold down this plunge into debt. By the way, Mr. President, just before I came over here, I checked the debt clock, which I have on my website. And the numbers, of course, turn faster than you can write them down because that's how fast we're plunging into more debt. But as of just probably, 15 minutes or so ago, our national debt stood at $15 trillion, nearing $16 trillion. Now, none of us can comprehend what $1 trillion is. It's impossible. I mean, there have been all kinds of things. If you stack dollars on top of each other, you go to the moon and back and so forth and so on. But I think it's important that we understand the gravity of our situation here in terms of our plunge into debt and what impact it's going to have on the future for this country and what debt burden it's going to have on future generations now getting ever closer to our own. 15,935,590,000,000, 590, oh wow, let me see, trillion, billion, million, 15,935,594,616,879 was what our debt was. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 digits. 15, 935, 594, 616, 879, So we took a mini step, just a little bit of a step in August, basically saying we're going to cap this spending so that we don't spend more than that going forward, and that will at least slow down the rate of plunging into debt. It doesn't begin to do what we need to do to address this, but it will slow down. And so what have we done since? What we've done is bring a number of bills to this floor, all of which have violated the agreement that we made. We were on this floor, and I didn't vote for this because I had a lot of skepticism about, first of all, I felt it was woefully short of what we needed to do. And secondly, I believe that having served here before and seen how this process works, I thought, we're going to waive this time after time after time. We're going to violate the agreement that we agreed to. So the majority voted for this, and we were congratulating each other. This is an important step to dealing with our budget crisis. And we have committed now not to spend more than what this budget agreement, the cap that this budget agreement has put on us. So, postal reform bill violated the cap, spending more than the cap allowed. The student loan interest rate extension looks like we got the score now, and we're going to violate the cap. The Senate version that went over on the transportation bill violated the cap. The payroll tax extension and the Violence Against Women Act all violated what we had promised we would do. And we wonder why the American people are skeptical. We wonder why our approval rating is in the low double digits. I mean, really low, almost into single digits. Why people are just frustrated and upset with this? Because we tell them we've made this promise to be fiscally responsible, and virtually every bill we bring up here is irresponsible, and we waive what we had agreed to do. And so we can hardly blame them for our skepticism here. Now let me talk about this middle of the night stuff. Another problem you have, you can't go home and you just simply can't explain, is the fact that, no, this was not talked about in the Senate. No, this was not talked about in the House. There was no process. And yet somebody, as we tried to merge the two bills in the dark of the night, unnamed, no process, slipped in a provision, and there it is. And usually we find out about this later. Well, in this case, we had a process. Senator Coates from Indiana worked with Senator Durbin, a Democrat from Illinois, and worked with another Democrat, senior senator from Ohio, to come to an agreement on a provision that impacted our areas, the Great Lakes area, in a significant way, and that was part of the Senate bill. The House didn't take this up at all. In the dark of the night, during the conference deliberations, our provision was removed, a bipartisan provision by senators looking out for the economic interests of their state and, by the way, the economic interests of this country, because what was dropped in the middle of the night is something that could potentially cost our government and therefore cost our taxpayers hundreds of billions of dollars. And we were fortunate enough to have discovered that, because the bringing those bills to the floor was delayed, and we had time to dig into it and all of a sudden find out that this was done. What's really egregious here is that this is not a partisan issue. We all know that the House is controlled by my party. I don't know who put this in. I don't know exactly the motives as to why they put this in. But here it is, at dark of the night, slip it into the bill, overturn something that was processed through the Appropriations Committee, deliberated, discussed, voted on, brought to the Senate, voted on again, sent over there, and eliminated. And so what are the consequences? What are the consequences of all that? And what does this have to do with what I'm talking about here? Well, it sounds minuscule. We're talking about Asian carp. Now, why is the senator from Indiana sitting here talking about Asian carp and hundreds of billions of dollars of cost? Well, let me just tell you why. Asian carp is a generic term for 4 species of non-native fish: grass bighead, black, and silverhead carp. These fish were introduced to the United States in the 70s to assist agricultural interests in the southern states. At some point, probably through flooding, the carp escaped into the Mississippi River system, and they since have spread throughout that whole watershed. They're voracious eaters, which make them beneficial, and you can see why they were imported. They're beneficial for agricultural settings, controlled agricultural settings, fish farms and so forth. But they create serious ecological challenges when competing for food with native species. Now, I agree wholeheartedly that the spread of Asian carp throughout the Mississippi River and potentially into the Great Lakes is a serious and pressing problem. And I'm committing to addressing it, as is Senator Durbin and Senator Brown from Ohio. And we worked out a compromise agreement in terms of how we should go forward with this. I need to say that a number of steps have already been taken by the Corps of Engineers. In 2002, the Army Corps of Engineers installed the first of a series of electric barriers along the lower reach of the Chicago area waterway system. And in doing so, they believe they have successfully to date prevented the migration of carp into the Great Lakes. In 2009, the Corps began DNA testing to detect Asian carp in locations upstream of the barrier system. And the testing showed that these barriers have been very effective, to use the Corps words, in preventing Asian carp from entering the waterway. In fact, when the Illinois Department of Resources, Natural Resources, wanted to check this out, they purposely dumped a bunch of toxins into the Chicago waterway to discover the extent of the Asian carp infestation. Those toxins killed tens of thousands of fish, but only one Asian carp was found among them. And since that time, the Army Corps has firmly held that the electric barriers are working as designated. Furthermore, in 2010, Indiana Department of Natural Resources constructed barriers in the watershed, and no state has gone further and taken greater lengths to address this question than my state of Indiana, as well as the state of Illinois, in terms of preventing the introduction of carp, Asian carp, into the Great Lakes system. It's economically devastating for us if this happens, and yet it's economically devastating for us and for Illinois if what was proposed in the dark of the night by the House of Representatives into this bill goes forward. Currently, the Army Corps of Engineers is undergoing an extensive study. And despite all the attempts to take these steps, which so far have proven to be successful, this provision that was incorporated in there could result in the closing of the locks of this waterway system. And it would endanger economically endangerment of about $14 billion per year in economic activity and over 100,000 jobs in this metropolitan area that I described that rely on the Chicago area waterway system. Closing the locks also may cost up to an additional $100 billion because it would require completely overhauling Chicago's underground water and sewage system. Closing the locks would also render worthless the billions of dollars that have already been invested to complete the Corps of Engineers flood control projects along the entire Mississippi watershed. And they may not even solve the problem. While the Chicago waterway system is the only direct continuous connection between the Great Lakes system, other potential pathways could allow carp migration in times of flooding. So while it's clear that closing the Chicago locks is not an economically viable solution for stopping Asian carp, and I do understand the concerns the Great Lakes states have on this issue, and I share those concerns, as a result of all that, we worked out a bipartisan compromise solution to addressing this area, which would allow a study to go forward, allow an economic assessment of the various options that had been presented, and then give Congress the information so that it could make a decision as to which solution was best needed to go forward. What this provision does in this bill is simply give the agency responsible here the authority to go ahead with the project, even though with what they think the solution is, without Congress having anything to say about it whatsoever. It's a pre-authorization on a new project which could include closing of the locks, and if it does, it would have hundreds of billions of dollars of financial implications for the taxpayers and for this Congress, but also have enormous negative economic impact on Northwest Indiana and Northeast Illinois and the entire Chicago region, and the commerce, all of that commerce that flows up and down the Mississippi and up and down the St. Lawrence Seaway. The other problem with this is the new language also expedites the study, even though the Corps says they need more time to do so. So I guess in conclusion, Mr. President, there are two things here. One is the egregious procedures that continue to give the public such a negative slant on how we do business here. This bundling of bills where we are forced to vote yes or no on the whole bundling up and down, and can't separate them out and let our yes stand for one purposeful interest or another, or a no stand for that bundling. And second, these midnight procedures, these slip it in there without going through the regular process. This body of Congress, both the House and the Senate, need to return to regular process, where we bring an idea forward, where it is worked through the committee, where it is transparent to all who are looking at it, where we give our yay or give our nay, and when we move it through the system, rather than simply changing things in the dark of the night at the last minute, where we have no opportunity to amend it, no opportunity to address it. So as we go forward with this, I am going to object on the basis of Rule 28 on this. I don't know how it will all turn out, but I hope my colleagues will understand that this is more than just something that affects Indiana and Illinois and the Great Lakes. This is something that affects the way we do business here. And if we can't enforce these rules, we're going to continue to follow these practices that the American people have just come to absolutely hate and think that they have a dysfunctional Congress. We deserve better than this, and I hope my colleagues will agree. And with that, I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
The senator from California.
Mr. President, before